Hello everyone. Welcome to this session provided by Risk Ledger as part of the Building a Smarter State event. Thank you very much for joining. I can't see the participants as we do this. If you have questions, there's a Q&A section on the left-hand side of your screen. I'm informed by our very reliable tech assistants here, so please do use that if you need to. Throughout the session here, we're going to have a couple of poll questions to keep it interactive. There is a Slido link I believe, in that section on the left-hand side. If you go to slido.com, the code to enter is 4125, and you'll be able to participate in the polls as we go. Again, if you have any questions, go to that Q&A and you'll be able to ask those questions for support there. So, as an introduction, we're talking about building a smarter state today. I think the link... Security and risk management generally has a bad reputation for slowing things down, for hindering innovation, for stopping things happening smartly or as quick as we generally want them to. As technology develops and organizations work increasingly in complex environments at a faster pace, we need to find ways to do everything we need to do as organizations, particularly in the public sector, to be able to cover ourselves in terms of risk and governance, do the things we need to do, but without hindering that innovation, with enabling ourselves and the organizations we work with to keep innovating, keep moving forwards, and keep up pace with the world as technology develops and as things move on. This becomes even harder in the context of our supply chains. We're not just talking about one organization managing your own risks controls the way you work. You're talking about how to look at organizations that you work with, and they might range from tiny little startups, one-man bands that provide really specific services for you that you can't live without, to huge global organizations that are providing your entire IT infrastructure. And you need to find ways of working with all of these different suppliers, helping them to provide the service to you, but making sure you're comfortable with them and you've got the assurances you need over those suppliers so that you can be confident in saying, I understand my supply chain, I understand the risks involved, and I'm happy to continue working with the supply chain network I've got to provide the service I'm providing or to do the job that our organization is trying to do. With the supply chain, you often don't have visibility past that first supplier. So this is why it's often really difficult, but also really important. And we're going to talk through some of those challenges, and a smarter way that we're looking at this problem and how to manage those risks in your supply chain. It's not just going to be me. Like I've said, we've got some polls throughout the session to keep it interactive. We've also kindly been joined by a couple of Risk Ledger's clients in the public sector to share some of their experiences towards the end of the session, and then we'll do a short panel question and answer session with myself from Risk Ledger and with our kind attendees, Mark and Gary from NHS Test and Trace and from City of London Police. So, quick introduction. My name's Emily Hodges. I'm the Chief of Staff at Risk Ledger, and by background, I'm an information security consultant. Spent quite a bit of time with PwC doing this kind of work, and independently as a consultant doing various third-party jobs and other security improvement programs. So we're going to start the session with a quick poll to get things started, test out the functionality. So if you go to that Slido link, you should see this question there waiting for you to answer. The first question we're going to start with is the management of third parties and supply chain risks on the agenda at your organisation? Is it being talked about? Is it a concern amongst yourself, your colleagues, your peers, your senior management team? Is it on the agenda? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that question, and we should see the results. 100%. Well, I wasn't quite expecting 100, but not bad going. Great to see the results. Hopefully you can see them on the screen as well. 100% of you said that yes, supply chain risk management is on the agenda at your organisation. So why is this? Why are you all talking about it, thinking about it? Why is it important? There's lots of reasons for this. I'm sure you've all got your own individual reasons in the context of your own organisations. We see at Risk Ledger, we see two key drivers for this. One of them, the first is law and regulation. So there are various laws that different organisations have to abide to. GDPR is a good example. You have to look after the data, protect the privacy rights of the individuals that you process the data of. Not only do you have to do that within your own organisation, you have to make sure that if you use suppliers that do that, they are protecting that also. And the same applies for the NIST directive, for various other laws and regulations, where you're not just responsible for what happens in your own organisation, you're responsible for any suppliers you choose to work with, that they provide the same protection, they have the same controls in place, not just for that data, but for any business interactions you have with them. The second part is around incidents. We all know this happens. We see it in the news. We see it happen to our peers, organisations within both the public and the private sector. I won't call out any names. I don't think there needs to be any more calling out of that. What we need to be doing is helping support those victims when it happens and helping to stop it happening more in future. And that's what we're trying to do here. When an incident happens, there's reputational damage. You start to degrade the trust that the public have in your services. You also have this cost of recovery, and we know that resources are massively stretched. We don't have spare time and capacity to try and rebuild after an event. We know that it costs a lot of money and time and effort to recover from both cyber events and other supply chain events that might happen. It takes a lot of damage control to build back that reputation. So we're going to try another poll now. This one, a little bit more sensitive. The polls are completely anonymous. We've got no idea who's saying what. So please do be as honest as you can in this. And it will be interesting to see how many of your organizations have suffered a supply chain incident within the last 12 months. So this could be a cyber incident. It could be some other kind of data breach, accidental data exposure. It could be an incident related to something not related to security. So with all of this, we're not just talking about security risks. There are other things we need to look at within our supply chain, which we'll go into in a bit more detail, but it could be that there was some kind of financial risk exposed, some kind of fraudulent activity in one of your suppliers that impacted you and you had to deal with that. So the results on that, we've got a third of you have had an incident and 2/3 of you haven't, and that's within the last 12 months. So a reasonable amount of people have had incidents. 2/3 of you have been lucky thus far. Well done. Fingers crossed it stays that way. But a large number of organisations are suffering incidents on their supply chain, which is why it's on the agenda and people are talking about it. So as we said, incidents are increasing. There's various reports out there that you can find that give various different stats on how much these are increasing. We're seeing it increase quarter on quarter, which means we haven't quite got it right. We haven't yet fixed this problem and nailed how to start reducing these, how to get on top of attackers and other risks in there and start to lower these stats. So how do we do this? Let's see how our attendees are managing their supply chain risks at the moment. Now there's 4 different options here. How does your organization currently manage supply chain risks? We've got 4 options. One is an informal ad hoc process, or you don't really look at it much at all. One is you use some kind of spreadsheet or Word document as a questionnaire to go out. One is, do you use a tool, a piece of technology to help you with this, or do you use a managed service? You might use more than one. But let's go with the main method you use for doing this. So the answer's there. Everybody uses some kind of spreadsheet Word questionnaire. Yep, and this is the most common thing that we see here. This is the way the process has evolved over time to be these spreadsheet word questionnaires. We'll talk a bit more about those in future, so keep that in mind. We've had, I'm just going to leave that on a little bit longer. We've got a few more answers coming in. So also some uses of some ad hoc informal processes. So nothing necessarily structured there, and some uses of technology as well, which is great to see. Okay, one more poll just to give us some context of what we're working with here. How many third parties does your organization work with? How many suppliers do you have? And this typically organizations actually struggle to find this number, often have to go to procurement to finance departments to figure out who we're working with. But ballpark figure, how many organizations do you work with? What this also does is gives us an idea of the scale of the challenge here, the scale of the process that might need to be put in place, how we address and manage the risks within this number of suppliers. So results on that poll so far look like we are either end of that scale. We've got some of you, perhaps smaller organizations, a smaller supply chain ecosystem going on, and some of you that much larger end, far more organizations there. And that's where it gets really complex and more difficult to manage, is where you've got not just a few suppliers that you can really get to know, you've got big numbers here, not something that you can manage on a spreadsheet. Okay, so how do we do this? What should we be looking at with our suppliers? Now, there's things that you want to protect for your own benefit. If you're giving over data to your suppliers, you obviously want to protect that data. It might be that you have some kind of connection into your suppliers, and you're going to want to make sure that your suppliers are secure so that there's no leakage of some kind of breach from them into your organization. You also have a trusted relationship with your supplier. So even if you're not sharing any data, you don't have any connection with them, that trusted relationship creates an opportunity for an attacker to gain access to your people, to your organization. We've seen an incident recently where a supplier had an email breach. A phishing email was sent from a trusted email address to all of their customers. And that gets much of a higher click rate in terms of the phishing email, because there's already that trusted relationship there. You're expecting to receive an email from that supplier email address, so you're more likely to click the links in the email to hand over the data that's asked for. So your suppliers are important to look at, even if you're not necessarily sharing data with them, because that trust that you have with them is something that's valuable, an opportunity that an attacker could exploit. You also have that link with them reputationally. So if your relationship with that supplier is known publicly, if they have an incident, an issue, even if it's not directly related to you, if it's known that you have that relationship, that might cause a reputational impact for you. So it's important to help your suppliers to protect themselves, to take an interest in what they're doing and the likelihood that they're going to have some kind of incidents and issues. When we look at the specific types of things you might want to know about your suppliers, might want to look at, from a security perspective, there's various different frameworks, standards you can use to tell you what to look for. There's also not just the security things you should be looking for. So you also are likely to want to know about the financial stability of your suppliers, any procurement risk involved. Are they likely to be around in 12 months if you need that service to continue? Are they abiding by any other relevant laws, so employment laws, health and safety laws? Are they doing what they need to do to prevent modern slavery within their organization and within their supply chains? Supply chain is one that we see people often missing. So we've included supply chain management within this framework of things to look at. And that's because if you're trying to understand the risk and manage the risk within your own supply chain, it's not just those first degree relationships that have an impact on you. It's the suppliers that your suppliers use to provide their services. And most of the time, you don't have visibility beyond that. So one easy way that you can start to get that is to ask your suppliers what they're doing to manage their own supply chain. And that starts to build this knock-on effect of understanding not just your first degree, but what's happening beyond that. What suppliers are they using? And are there inherent risks in that 1 degree removed connection that you don't yet know about? Some ways we see organizations trying to do this sometimes is by looking at certifications solely. So sometimes organizations will only look at certifications. They'll say, I will only use a supplier if they have got cyber essentials. And this is particularly common within the government sector to use cyber essentials. Sometimes organizations will use this as part of their program. So they might say, for a subset of suppliers, we only want to see this certification. They might say that if a supplier has a certification, that puts them down process A. If they don't have a certification, it puts them down process B, and we'll treat them differently like that. Certifications are a useful base point to start with in some situations, but there are some issues with them and some things that trip us up. One of the biggest things and thing that I think is most important to bring out is that particularly for smaller suppliers, it's often quite a high barrier to meet, quite a lot of time and effort investment to get these certifications, quite a few hoops for them to jump through. And that can sometimes stifle the innovation in these kind of startups and prevent particularly public sector organizations from benefiting from that innovation, from having relationships with those smaller organizations because they can't meet those certification barriers in order to get through the door. And what we want to be able to do is open up relationships, collaborations between various different organizations, being able to have more collaboration between public and private sector, including much smaller, newer, more innovative companies that at the moment sometimes struggle to get through that barrier if the barrier is a blanket certification barrier. What we'd like to see organizations doing is looking not just at specific certifications, which might have a narrow scope, looking at very specific risk controls. We'd like them to be looking at the various different topics over a comprehensive framework like we showed on the previous slide, but being able to tailor that based on the type of organization you're working with and having different expectations and different ways you work in those organizations. So not setting a high bar for everybody, but working and making a judgment with each of your suppliers and helping them to improve, collaborating with them to make improvements and supporting them to provide the service that you want them to provide. Sometimes the challenge we get, the problem that organizations find in doing this and the way that we've ended up, I think across industries, across organizations, is that they're trying to do this. They've realized that asking for one specific thing is not enough. It's not going to give them what they need. So they've tried to make it more comprehensive. You've perhaps got different teams inputting questions saying, I need X, Y, and Z, asking of our suppliers. And this is where the process just becomes a big unwieldy set of questions, becomes really cumbersome for suppliers to engage with. And you don't get what you need. You're not getting any value out of that process, either the suppliers or yourself as an organization. We see this happen time and time again, where organizations have ended up in a position where their supplier risk management processes have become incredibly costly, paying hundreds, if not thousands per supplier for consultants to go out and assess them. It takes far too long to engage with the supplier. Your procurement cycles, your sales cycles become really, really long. And because that's such a cumbersome process, such a burden to go through, you can't do that with many of your suppliers. You're only doing it with a small subset, perhaps your very most critical suppliers, which has inherent risks to that. It's also not very effective. You're not getting the information you need. The way that this is set up incentivizes suppliers to give you the information they know you want to hear, which is not a true picture of what they're doing and doesn't give that safe space, that open communication to actually help those suppliers improve, allow them to admit where they need support and allow you to help them with that. So our last poll of the session, what's your biggest barrier to running your supply chain risk management programs at the moment? What are you struggling with most within your supply chain risk management programs? Is it limited human resources? Is it the engagement from the supplier side? Is it you're not quite sure what the best practice is, what you should be doing? Or is it just too painful? It's become too big and difficult to do? Just give it a few minutes for a few seconds for the results to come in on there. Okay, we've got a few results in there. Limited resources is what that's looking like. I mean, yeah, I think we've seen all four of these options as the barriers on there, which is why they're on there. We're now going to look at a new way of doing this. We're building a smarter way. Yeah, and I can see some of those other issues coming in as well. So at the moment, organizations are finding this difficult. They're struggling with ways to get this information and to work with their suppliers to improve and reduce the risks in that. I'm going to talk you through the way that we imagine this should be working, that what we're trying to build here at Risk Ledger. I want you to imagine that every security officer, every risk and compliance officer within every organization had a controls management system that they can use to understand what controls they need to implement. They can easily get free support on how they need to implement those controls. And they've got an easy way to manage those controls when they're working operationally. They've got an easy way to distribute the responsibility to the teams that are operating those controls on a day-to-day basis. They've got an easy way to understand if those controls are actually happening. So, for example, you can have John from HR telling you within this controls management process that he has actually performed the background checks that he was supposed to perform on the new starters today. You can have real-time information from your patch management systems to give you the latest updates on your patching controls. You've got a single view of the controls running within your organization. Now imagine that that organization is a client of yours and is a supplier of yours, and you as the client of that supplier want to assess that organization, want to understand the risk that they pose to you. You want to see the controls that are operating within that organization and what your risk exposure is. Imagine if instead of relying on what they tell you, the point-in-time assessment, the questions that you ask them, instead you can connect to that organization, much like a LinkedIn connection, and you can have a continuous real-time view into their controls management system, see how it's operating in real time. Now imagine it's not just you that connects to this supplier. All of their customers are connecting to this supplier. They are all viewing this same controls management system. They're all viewing that same view of how the supplier is operating their controls day to day in real time as it happens. It gives a kind of crowdsourcing accountability to what the supplier is doing. And it also crowdsources that knowledge, that experience. The customers that are connected can help that supplier improve. They can see issues, perhaps even before the supplier sees them. There's a pool of expertise across industries that are all collaborating to help this one supplier improve, because everybody benefits from that supplier improving. It has a knock-on impact to all of the customers, all of the clients. And imagine it's also not just one supplier that has this. Imagine all of your suppliers across all of your services use this same controls management system and can share that data with you in real time. You can compare and contrast, you can analyze the trends across all of your suppliers, and you can share your best practice with them. Imagine if all organizations shared a continuous live view into their security operations with their trusted partners. And imagine the power of the collective data set that this would produce. If one organization has some kind of incident here, every other organization within the network can help each other to analyze that incident and to inoculate the other organizations before that incident spreads across the full network. You could measure and compare the performance of controls versus specific attack vectors, specific tools, techniques, and procedures that attackers are using in real time in the wild against organizations. You could see them as they happen. You could compare controls that those organizations had at the time and what they were doing to defend those attacks. And you can use this data to prioritize the controls that we work on in other organizations across the rest of the supply chain. You could correlate weaknesses across all of the organizations. Where are organizations struggling? Where are the attackers winning? Where do we rally our efforts as a collective group of good guys trying to defend, to improve our controls, improve our education, improve our support for particular types of suppliers? Perhaps it's the smaller suppliers that are getting impacted most, and perhaps we need to rally around them a bit more than we already are. All of this data already exists within individual organizations. Individual organizations have a view, however fragmented, of what's happening. All we're trying to do here is to join up those dots and create that collective, collaborative data set and network. So this is what we're building at Risk Ledger. And apologies that that's a little smaller. Hopefully you can still see it on there, and I'm happy to catch up with you afterwards and show you what it looks like in real time. What you can see here is the Risk Ledger network, the organizations who are on this network. At the moment, Risk Ledger is providing an efficient, a smart way of doing supplier assurance, which means that when an organization joins the network, they become one of these dots in the diagram that you can see. They connect to other organizations and they start sharing that security control information and start encouraging and helping each other to improve. This enables us to do interesting things. It's things that people have not been able to do in a supply chain risk management program before. It allows us to look beyond that first party risk, allows us to see not just the risks of your first tier of suppliers, but you can follow those risks down the chain. You can find risks that are further away from you that you didn't have visibility before. You can start to look at concentration risks. So if you have a supplier who's connected to multiple clients, perhaps they're within the same industry, perhaps they're part of critical national infrastructure. If that one supplier goes down, it could impact a good chunk of one particular industry. Previously, organizations are not sharing data about their suppliers. So here with the connections, you can see where one supplier is connected to many clients, and the impact of that one supplier going down is much more than just the impact on one individual customer or client. You can also use it to communicate, to collaborate across the supply chain. So imagine, as I described before, imagine there's a breach in one of these organizations. At the moment, what happens when there's a breach in an organization is that organization will, as quickly as they can, try and figure out what happened, try and contain that breach, figure out who they need to notify, what they need to do about that. That can take hours, if not days, if not sometimes weeks before that's noticed and communicated. Here we can have a way where security teams, risk teams are directly in communication with each other at all times. They can click a button, they can send a message immediately saying, this is what we've seen, we're investigating. And that can then be passed down the supply chain. It doesn't rely on legal teams, on PR teams trying to figure out who do we tell, what information do we publish. You've got a secure way to communicate internally between those teams much quicker, which enables them, gives organizations the opportunity to prevent the attack from spreading further, and lets organizations rally around an organization that is being attacked, that's having a live incident, to help them to contain and to rectify the issue. What we're going to do now is look a bit more at Risk Ledger in action. So looking at Risk Ledger as an assurance tool, as a supply chain risk management tool at the moment, it gives you that continuous real-time view into your suppliers' controls, into how they're operating their controls. because of the network model, because you've got these connections between organizations, and it's not just a one-way connection, it's not just between two organizations, you've got a whole network of them. It allows you to have that communication. It allows you to collaborate, not just with your own suppliers, but beyond that and within and across industries, between public and private sector. And that collaboration, that encouragement for suppliers to improve, helps drive down the prevalence of security incidents. We're driving for a real reduction in security incidents. We're driving to improve the security of the global supply chain, not just to improve the way that we measure and assure and assess against our suppliers. We're going to hear now from some of the Risk Ledger clients, people who are using this in action already. First of all, we have got a video from Darren from the City of London Corporation. Unfortunately, Darren couldn't be with us today, but he's kindly recorded a video to tell you about his experiences of using Risk Ledger in practice. So if we could play that video, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayden, and good afternoon. I'm Darren Reid. I'm Assistant Director of Commercial Contract Management at the City of London Corporation. I lead a team which is concerned with the ongoing assurance of the corporation's critical suppliers throughout the operational phase of the agreements. That covers all commercial elements of the relationship, from contract creation, corporate KPI performance and risk management, through the cycle to exit management. So it's an end-to-end. As a local authority or a contracting authority, the City Corporation is subject to the public contracts regulations. In the supplier selection process includes a number of mandatory exclusion grounds. In the context of supply chain security, the area of concern is compliance with GDPR. At the selection stage, we undertake due diligence to ensure that suppliers have the appropriate technical measures and adequate resources in place to ensure the protection of rights of data subjects. And so we have assurance prior to making an award, but it doesn't end there. We have a duty to provide ongoing assurance that these criteria are being met throughout the operational phase of the agreement. For most of these measures, it becomes relatively straightforward corporate KPIs that are integrated into the performance management systems of a contract. But with these technical measures, it's a complex issue which evolves quite quickly. So I wanted and I needed a specific tool to support us. In addition to personal data, there's a great deal of commercially sensitive information which we need to keep secure. More generally, we want our stakeholders to trust that we're doing everything that we can to protect ourselves and our partners from cyber threats. And an area of increasing concern for us is business email compromise. And some other organizations have suffered from that, and it has damaged trust in relationships. With all that I've said there, it's quite a complex area of measurement. And to put it into perspective, the corporation has at any given time around about 1,000 to 1,100 live contracts, and that would obviously be at the tier 1 level. It's a massive task to be able to understand the level of risk in this area, even just in the direct relationships before we expand that down the tiers of the supply chain. We identified and reviewed a few options which would meet our needs, but the reason that we chose the Risk Ledger solution, or a few of the reasons, was that, well, initially we became aware of Risk Ledger when they participated in a Mansion House event that was relating to cyber and tech. So I met the team there, and being based on the edge of the city, it was useful to have that direct face-to-face contact with the Risk Ledger team. Being web-based, with unlimited user registration, and the simplicity for clients and supplier organizations to actually interface with the system was really important to us. The assurance framework is comprehensive and it's updated by Risk Ledger, which means it's not something that we need to track and monitor. And knowing that it was developed with the National Cyber Security Centre, that brought an extra layer of comfort to me when I was making that decision and being responsible for that decision. On the regular updates, Quite recently, the framework has been updated to include 4 ESG measures, which is helping us to baseline our position in that area also. So it's more than just cyber, it's been quite helpful for the governance concerns that we have at the moment. Risk Ledger handling the initial supplier outreach and onboarding is a fantastic efficiency gain for us, rather than us having to go out and contact up to 1,100 suppliers in an initial phase. So that was a real bonus. And suppliers being responsible for the ongoing updates of their own profiles again. So when anything is due for an update, or if there's a change to the framework, it's not something that we have to handle, and we just have a visibility of their level of compliance when we download their profile from the platform. From a supplier relationship perspective, we had reassuring feedback to those which supported the initial trial. I think we ran it with 20 across different categories in the first stage. They also found it to be simple and efficient. So following the trial, we identified that there were some things that we wanted to explore a little bit further as far as supply chain risk. So that actually proved that it would be effective if it was rolled out more widely. And importantly, but not the most important thing, is that the annual subscription to the service was around about 1/4 of the cost of a single full-time employee. And in reality, that's offsetting the cost of about 2 to 3 full-time employees that we would have had to recruit if we continued through the traditional performance management route. For the City of London Corporation, the main benefits of using the Risk Ledger platform are the ongoing assurance and resource efficiency, not just at the measurement phase, but in continuous monitoring. It gives us visibility of individual risk controls with critical suppliers. So if we need to check multiple suppliers against a single measure, it's very easy for us to do that. As we're bringing on new suppliers, we're finding that some have already created their profile on Risk Ledger, meaning that we have visibility of their position within a few minutes. And the beauty of the platform, as other contracting authorities are joining the platform, is that our common suppliers are being reviewed by multiple peer organisations. And if anything flags, we communicate that through our professional network. Additionally, the exports of the supply performance reports are of a standard that can be appended to formal written reports to senior leadership without any further editing. So it's assurance and simplicity and efficiency across the board.
That's great. So that was Darren Reed from the City of London Corporation sharing his experiences. Mark, I wonder if you'd like to introduce yourself and give a bit of a view of what you're getting from Risk Ledger at the moment.
Oh, yes, good afternoon. My name is Mark Robertson. I work in the CISA office in Test and Trace. Specifically, I head up risk and assurance for Test and Trace at the moment. I should say that I'm contracted in, and what I'm about to say doesn't necessarily reflect either the views directly of Test and Trace or indeed, let alone HMG. But I thought I'd just share a few thoughts and so forth with you about how we use Risk Ledger and where it's taken us. I should say it's the first time I've actually sat this side of a sort of webinar sort of thing, let alone in the middle of a sort of pandemic, and slightly anxious that all the technology holds up. So forgive me if it doesn't. But it's also quite bizarre that for the first time in many years, presenting, that I'll be mentioning such phrases as things like genome sequencing, reagents, robotics, sewage, and suppliers all in the same sort of presentation. So hopefully it will produce a little bit of interest. Before I go any further, I just thought I'd just share with you one or two numbers around Test and Trace, not least because there's so much rubbish being spoken about, really. I'll turn my camera on, actually. I suppose that might help. Oh, just turn it off. Sorry. And I thought I'd just give you some numbers, just to give you some headline figures about how big a sort of operation and sense it is. We have currently, in the last little over a year now, completed somewhere in excess of 200 million tests, both sort of lateral flow tests and sort of PCR tests and so forth. We've put over 1 billion LFD lateral flow devices into the system, made available, manufactured, and The results, we're currently running about the combination of the two sorts of PCRs and various tests, LFDs, running about 3 million tests a week, processing 3 million tests a week. And 86% of the results from those tests get sent back to the user, to the client, as it were, within 24 hours. Our app has been downloaded 22 million times in the last few months. And we've also managed to put together or created 2,500 test sites for both systematic and asymptomatic and symptomatic testing. We do more genome sequencing in any other country in the world. We currently have, I think, about 40% of the world's capacity for genome sequencing. That's to say, looking for variants of concern and all other bits and pieces. And then we've also done other things, like just happened to have created the country's biggest testing lab just outside of Birmingham, which is ongoing, and also various other public-private partnerships across the country, a whole lab testing network. We've also introduced countless robotics into those testing environments. The most dangerous part for the operators and the test is when they open up the packages that we all send in. And so taking that out of the equation and introduce robotics into the system. And there's all sorts of other surveillance systems that we're putting now in place increasingly in place, ranging from monitoring sewage for the virus, so we can get a better idea of where it's going on. The point I'm trying to make is twofold. Firstly, there's a huge supply chain that kind of supports the back of that, which is absolutely crucial to us. And secondly, that unlike probably any other sort of most, if not all, I've not really worked much in government, but government department, we're more of akin to a manufacturing industry than we are to a sort of traditional sort of government departments. We had, when we started around, and it was only at the beginning of this year when we started to look seriously. Hitherto, we'd been doing pretty much what everybody else was doing and spinning out large spreadsheets for people, for third parties. When we started looking earlier this year, we had an opportunity really to kind of introduce a platform for doing our third party management. But we had, as I say, complex supply chains to manage. We are, growing rapidly all the time, or we were at that stage certainly. And we were very much of a startup company, really, in essence. I like to call it a startup company that's really, almost on crack and speed, almost, And at the same time, we had to develop a sort of delivery network, something to akin of an Amazon as well at the same time. So not only manufacturing the results and producing the results, but have a delivery mechanism as well to support all that activity. Like probably most of you, we kind of researched the market a lot. We wanted to look at the various options, including those that I've used in the past that look at sort of scanning of public-facing networks and so forth to understand how well they're protected, through to automation of some spreadsheet type stuff, traditional sorts of stuff, questionnaire tools, and so forth. But we had also wanted, we had an eye to the future as well. We wanted something that would not only scale quickly for us, but also we could use in multiple cases, multiple use cases. So ironically, I just come onto this call, as it were, from another one with our counter fraud people who want to use our platform to give what I consider to be like a canary in the coal mine type instance, where it gives alerts to potential financial crime issues that we might be facing. I also recognise, however, that coming from a mining family, as it were, until they close all the pits down, but that canaries also die of old age, and not necessarily just of gas. So, but but it will give us some sort of indication of what's going on. And we wanted to have a great deal of automation in the system. So, like many of you others, you've indicated, we haven't got a great deal of resource, as you might imagine, managing all these sorts of things. So we wanted something that would be automated and also efficient for us. I thought I'd share with you, if I may, a couple of quick test cases, or use cases, I should say, examples of how it's been working for us, which show slightly different elements of the tool. And I strongly believe, having done this sort of thing for many years now, third-party assurance, that Risk Ledger gave us a unique insight to. The first one was around a supplier to us who provided us with reagents, chemical reagents, and we knew that they didn't have any logical or physical links into our into test and trace, and indeed it didn't hold any of our personal data, and yet we discovered they've got a fairly low score, across Risk Ledger. One could easily conclude, if he was in the sort of compliance tick box type stuff, that where's the risk? Excuse me. Where's the risk? Why should we bother? Sort of stuff. However, when you put that knowledge into the context of around what they actually did for us, and the sorts of insights that Risk Ledger gave to us around their policies and procedures and various other bits and pieces, and that was, I say, delivering a risk of reagents, which, should they go away, it wouldn't be a simple case of us going down to Boots or something and buying a bunch of more of this particular chemicals, or indeed, and the whole thing would have to be recalibrated anyway, the sort of test platforms and so forth. So we'd be down for weeks if this went away. We discovered that they were pretty much a sitting target, really, for something like a widespread but untargeted attacks that get caught up as collateral damage. And so we worked with them directly, highlighting what the problem, what our concerns were. We did almost like a free piece of consultancy, giving them a potential roadmap to fix these stuff, and they were keen to get a 27001 certificate, which they've got no hope of getting at the time without doing what we're saying. And essentially, we secured that piece of they were delighted with that, I should say, and we helped them secure that piece of the supply chain, which not only positively impacted us, but actually impacted the wider NHS as well, because they supplied into the NHS. Second one is a little bit different. This was another prime supplier to us, and on their own, they have a good security sort of posture and so forth, and we had little concern with them actually. However, on examination and using the various tools that we can use, the algorithms that are back to link up suppliers, we discovered initially through our own work and then working with the business that they were actually closely linked with 3 other suppliers, and that they were all interlinked with that. And if one went down, the whole lot sort of went down. And we then kind of discovered that when we saw that sort of analysis, a graphical analysis, that what the problems were we were facing, and then we reached out to those other firms to investigate. That gave rise to some concerns, and again put in jeopardy some of our potential supply chains, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, if some of our supplies goes down and we can't test for a period of time, it kind of makes that something of a memorable day where we get another kick in the press and whatever. So again, that helped enormously for us to kind of fix those sorts of issues and see that. And I don't, again, personally believe that some of the other methods, particularly ones where you can't get that visualization, or indeed you're looking at some sort of security card type approach where you're only seeing external facing stuff. I know that some of you can do a little bit more than that, but nevertheless, ordinarily, I don't think we would have got that sort of level of insight into it. So they're the 2 cases. I thought I'd just finally really quickly end with some quick lessons we've got. I'd recommend you start small with this, with anything you get. Focus a lot on the contracts, making sure that you can contractually do this. Use the chat function in the tool. I think it's invaluable, so you can have real-time chats with the supplier. And the other big one I'd sort of say really quickly is resellers. We've got an awful lot of resellers, and we're actually interested in the firms behind them that are presenting risk. They're like brokers, as it were. I don't know if we go to one firm, they supply licenses for countless others. That might be unique to us. And the final thing is just add value. The tool can help you. It helps us to add value, and I think we've proved that with many of our suppliers. I appreciate a bit push for time, so I'll leave it there and open to questions.
Thanks very much, Mark. Gary, do you want to give us a quick insight into how you're using it?
Thanks, Emily. To introduce myself, I'm Gary Brassel, as it says on the tin, Director of Information and Chief Information Security Officer for 3 domains, in fact: the City of London Police, the City of London Corporation and the National Cybercrime Reporting Centre. So you heard from Darren earlier. He's actually one of my clients, as it were, in respect to the security portfolio. And one of the things I'll just come on to mention, I think, as by way of outline, is the ability to shift. So he looks after the procurement teams who are a principal user of this product, and actually takes a certain amount of the heavy lifting away from my security teams in respect of onboarding. So again, that's quite good. I don't think there's any secret. We've already heard around the the environmentals in respect of supply chain attacks. They are the soft underbelly, as it were. I'm quite comfortable in respect of my own security posturing as much as I can be, but of course that diminishes the further out I go in my concentric circles of supply chain. We, of course, I think, have the same challenge everyone that's probably listening in on this call has, and that is now the complexity of our supply chain and finding the edge. So, the edge of our supply chain isn't perhaps what we can see to the horizon. It's looking beyond that, which I think is the major challenge to us. And certainly understanding that capability has been something that's been driving us with this product, in being able to look beyond the horizon, to understand those interdependencies and those nodal points, which Mark's alluded to in his presentation, that start to surface those risks that you're not perhaps immediately aware of. So again, for us, extremely important. Like Mark, I'm sure he's no stranger to the regulator. We are heavily regulated. We are under the eye of Sauron almost daily, and being able to account for risk in our supply chain is absolutely critical to us in how we are able to manage and provide public confidence in our activities across all three of those domains. So, it really for us is about that capability to really match the growing demand with a limited resource base. So we're able to offset that by using technology more intelligently, which this allows us to do. From where I sit, I've got a team of people that look after this. So that's really good. They touch the tech every day. I go in and touch the tech when I need to, which is periodically, and it gives me the details I require to brief the chief officer team on the risks across our estate and our supply chain, and very easily articulate those areas that we'll be focusing on to actually improve, enhance, encourage, or good practice as well when that comes forward as well. So I'm really conscious of our time that we have left. So I will perhaps just pause and leave it there and allow questions to come in to give more detail, as I'm sure you may have some other areas. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Gary. Are there any burning questions for either Gary or Mark on their experiences? Tech UK guys, I don't know if you can see questions coming in on a chat function anywhere. If not, we'll wrap it up and let you guys go ahead onto your next sessions. Just to wrap up finally, if you'd like to learn more about the Risk Ledger platform, I'm sure that both Gary and Mark will be happy to chat to you further about it. Perhaps, guys, is it worth for connecting on LinkedIn? Is that the good way to do it?
Whatever.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Great. So if you do want to speak to them further about it, please do reach out to them to learn more about their experiences. If you'd like to see the platform in action, get a demonstration of the platform, we're running a group demo in a couple of weeks' time on the 6th of October. If you go to the Q&A menu on the left, there's a link displayed at the top for you to be able to sign up to that demo. Otherwise, head over to our website, riskledger.com, and they'll give you lots of information there and ways to get in touch with us. I hope you found the session useful. We'd love to chat more if you're up for it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. And thanks very much to the Tech UK guys for hosting.